Developmental characteristics and theories. Theories of psychosocial and cognitive development. After studying this chapter, you will be able to explain how social interactions influence the development of one's personality, especially with regard to one's personal sense of industry and identity. Provide examples of how Jean Piaget's stage theory of cognitive development can be used to guide learning experiences in and out of the classroom. Explain how Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of cognitive development connects social interaction in classrooms to the cognitive capacities of learners. Provide examples of how technology can encourage cognitive development by challenging current conceptions and encouraging collaborative interactions. Explain how cognitive development influences moral thinking and moral behavior. In the opening chapter, we pointed out that individuals vary in how they perceive and think about the world around them. This commonplace observation implies that you need to be aware of the major ways in which students differ from one another to design potentially effective lessons. What may work well for one part of your class may not work quite so well for another part. The lesson that was a huge success with last year's class may be a disaster in this year's class, if you fail to take into account critical differences between the two classes. The 5 chapters in parts 1 and 2 introduce you to how students may differ from one another in psychosocial development, cognitive development, age, mental ability, thinking style, achievement, ethnic background, and social class. You will also consider how those differences affect classroom learning. Human development is a complex topic to discuss. In addition to analyzing many different forms of behavior, we must trace the way each type of behavior changes as a child matures. Authors of books on development have adopted different strategies for coping with this challenge. Some have described theories that outline stages in the emergence of particular forms of behavior. Others have summarized significant types of behavior at successive age levels. Still others have examined specific types of behavior, noting age changes for every topic. Each approach has advantages and disadvantages. Developmental theories call attention to the overall sequence, continuity, and interrelatedness of aspects of development, but they typically account for only limited facets of behavior. Texts organized in terms of age levels make readers aware of varied aspects of children's behavior at a given age, but sometimes tend to obscure how particular types of behavior emerge and change. And although texts organized according to types of behavior do not have the limitation of the age level approach, they may make it difficult for the reader to grasp the overall pattern of behavior at a particular stage of development. In an effort to profit from the advantages and to minimize the disadvantages of each approach, this chapter and the next presents discussions of the development that combine all three. This chapter focuses on Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages, Jean Piaget's cognitive stages, and Lev Vygotsky's views on the role of social interaction. It also describes Piaget's ideas about moral development, Lawrence Kohlberg's extension of Piaget's work, and Carol Gilligan's criticism and modification of Kohlberg's theory. The next chapter illustrates or describes age-level characteristics of students at 5 levels: preschool, primary school, elementary school, middle school, and high school. Discussion at each age level focuses on 4 types of behavior: physical, social, emotional, and cognitive. I think I said 5, but that's 4. The information in these chapters will help you adapt teaching techniques to the students who are in the age range that you expect to teach, as well as develop expectations of student behavior across age ranges. The patterns of behavior described in these chapters are ones that typical children and adolescents exhibit. The following 3 chapters are devoted to individual differences and how to deal with them. Chapter 4, Understanding Student Differences, discusses the nature of variability and how students vary with respect to gender, mental ability, and cognitive style. Chapter 4, addressing cultural and socioeconomic diversity, addresses the characteristics of students from different ethnic and social class backgrounds. In Chapter 6, accommodating student variability, describes types of students who vary from their classmates to such an extent that they may require special kinds of education. Revealing assumptions. What students know and how students know. Connie feels at home. She is in a school and learning happens here. The secretaries in the school office were all very nice to her when she checked in, even though it is late Friday afternoon. As her staccato footsteps echo through the halls of the school that 10 minutes ago were filled with kids heading home for the weekend, she thinks back over her 30 years in schools. My students learned a lot in those 30 years, and so did I. Her steps quicken. Her newest students are waiting in the room just around the corner, and she is looking forward to the learning they will do together. "Hi, Doc," says Don and Celeste. Connie is supervising the classroom observations of their undergraduate teacher education program. After so many years teaching in schools, Connie is enjoying her new teaching role as a university supervisor, facilitating the learning of aspiring teachers like Don and Celeste. She is about to ask them about their week when Antonio walks in and flops into a chair. "What a week! Whew! I'm going to sleep this weekend." Antonio is 6 weeks into his first teaching job in a middle school. Connie is one of Antonio's mentors for his first year of teaching, his induction year. Connie allows a little chatting and then says, "Okay, let's find out what we have learned this week. What did you observe and what did you infer?" Connie has been encouraging her young colleagues to observe carefully and then reflect with equal care on what they have observed. Her goal is for them to become scholars of their teaching. Antonio speaks up first. "Last week I talked about our interdisciplinary unit. Our 7th graders are trying to identify a real problem and then come up with a solution to that problem. I was leading a discussion on problem identification this week and had them working in small groups. One group suggested that the environment should be the problem. Another group said drugs, and then a kid yelled out, 'Yeah, and sex and rock and roll too.' It just went downhill from there. We never did identify a problem. I don't think they understand what a problem is." Connie looked at Don and Celeste. "So what do you infer from Antonio's description of what happened in his class?" "Well," said Celeste, "maybe the students don't care about society's problems, but I think they simply don't know what the problems are. I've observed some high school classes where the students are really unaware of current events." Don agreed, offering an account of a conversation with some 4th graders. They didn't know anything. They had just read about the environment, and I was talking to 3 of them about global warming. They knew nothing about it, so I spent 10 minutes trying to help them understand what global warming is. Connie paused and said, "Okay, let's stop there for a minute and reflect on what you saw and what you said. First, what did you actually observe, and based on your observations, what have you inferred? Second, is your inference that students know very little about societal problems correct? Third, are you assuming that teaching is simply a matter of focusing on what kids know, or is it also important to understand how kids come to know?" As we observe students in classrooms, it is natural for us to infer, to explain or characterize what we see. Both our observations and our inferences are influenced by what we believe to be true, by the assumptions we make about the nature of teaching and learning. Many people assume that teaching is simply a matter of adding to what kids know. Why do teachers need to understand also how kids come to know their world and themselves? Are there other assumptions about the nature of teaching and learning revealed in this vignette? How do you conceive of developmental theory, and what assumptions about teaching and learning underlie your conception? How will you test those assumptions? Erickson, Psychosocial Development. Of all the developmental theories that we could have chosen to discuss, why did we decide to open this chapter with Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development? There are several reasons for this choice. Erikson describes psychological growth from infancy through old age. Thus, one can draw out instructional implications for every level of education, from preschool through adult education. Erikson's theory portrays people as playing an active role in their own psychological development through their attempts to understand, organize, and integrate their everyday experiences. This theory highlights the important role that cultural goals, aspirations, expectations, requirements, and opportunities play in personal growth, a theme discussed in Chapter 5. The basic principles of Erikson's theory. Epigenetic principle. Erikson based his description of personality development on the epigenetic principle, which states that in fetal development, certain organs of the body appear at certain specified times and eventually combine to form a child. Erikson hypothesized that just as the parts of the body develop in interrelated ways in a human fetus, so the personality of an individual forms as the ego progresses through a series of interrelated stages. All of these ego stages exist in some form from the very beginning of life, and each has a critical period of development. Psychosocial crisis. In Erikson's views, personality's development occurs as one successfully resolves a series of turning points or psychosocial crises. Although the word crisis typically refers to an extraordinary event that threatens well-being, Erikson had a more benign meaning in mind. Crises occur when people feel compelled to adjust to the normal guidelines and expectations that society has for them, but are not altogether certain that they are prepared to carry out these demands fully. For example, Western societies expect children of elementary and middle school age to develop a sense of industry, mostly through success in school. Adolescents are expected to come to terms with such questions as, who am I and where am I going? As you will see in the next section, Erikson describes these crises in terms of opposing qualities that individuals typically develop. For each crisis, there is a desirable quality that can emerge and a corresponding unfavorable characteristic. Erikson did not mean to imply that a healthy individual develops only positive qualities. He emphasized that people are best able to adapt to their world when they possess both the positive and negative qualities of a particular stage, provided the positive quality is significantly stronger than the negative quality. In the first stage, for example, it is important that the child learn trust, but a person who never experienced a bit of mistrust would struggle to understand the world. In Erikson's view, difficulties in development and adjustment arise when the negative quality outweighs the positive for any given stage, or when the outcome for most stages is negative. As you read through the following brief descriptions of the stages of psychosocial development, keep in mind that a positive resolution of the issue for each stage depends on how well the issue of the previous stage was resolved. An adolescent who strongly doubts her own capabilities, for example, may have trouble making the commitments required for identity development in adulthood. Stages of psychosocial development. The following designations are age ranges and essential characteristics of the stages of personality development are proposed by Erikson in Childhood and Society, 1963. Trust versus mistrust, birth to 1 year. The basic psychosocial attitude for infants to learn is that they can trust their world. The parents' consistency, continuity, and sameness of experience in satisfying the infant's basic needs fosters truth. Such an environment will permit children to think of their world as safe and dependable. Conversely, children whose care is inadequate, inconsistent, or negative will approach the world with fear and suspicion. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, 2 to 3 years, preschool. Just when children have learned to trust or mistrust their parents, they must exert a degree of independence. If toddlers are permitted and encouraged to do what they are capable of doing at their own pace and in their own way, and with judicious supervision by parents and teachers, they will develop a sense of autonomy, which is a willingness and ability to direct one's behavior. But if parents and teachers are impatient and do too many things for young children or shame young children for unacceptable behavior, these children will develop feelings of self-doubt. Initiative versus guilt, 4 to 5 years, preschool to kindergarten. The ability to participate in many physical activities and to use language sets the stage for initiative, which adds to autonomy and the quality of undertaking, planning, and attacking a task for the sake of being active and on the move. If 4 and 5-year-olds are given freedom to explore and to explore and experiment, and if parents and teachers take time to answer questions, tendencies toward initiative will be encouraged. Conversely, if children of this age are restricted and made to feel that their activities and questions have no point or are a nuisance to adults and older siblings, they will feel guilty about acting on their own. Industry versus inferiority, 6 to 11 years, elementary to middle school. A child entering school is at a point in development when behavior is dominated by intellectual curiosity and performance. He now learns to win recognition by producing things. He develops a sense of industry. If children at this stage are encouraged to make and do things well, helped to persevere, allowed to finish tasks, and praised for trying, industry results. If the children's efforts are unsuccessful, or if they are derided or treated as bothersome, feelings of inferiority result. Children who feel inferior may never learn to enjoy intellectual work and take pride in doing at least one kind of thing really well. At worst, they may believe they will never excel at anything. Identity versus role confusion, 12 to 18 years, middle through high school. The goal at this stage is development of the roles and skills that will prepare adolescents to take a meaningful place in adult society. The danger at this stage is role confusion, having no clear conception of appropriate types of behavior that others will react to favorably. If adolescents succeed, as reflected by the reaction of others, in integrating roles in different situations to the point of experiencing continuity in their perception of self, identity develops. In common terms, they know who they are. If they are unable to establish a sense of stability in various aspects of their lives, role confusion results. Intimacy versus isolation, young adulthood. To experience satisfying development at this stage, the young adult needs to establish close and committed intimate relationships and partnerships with other people. The hallmark of intimacy is the ethical strength to abide by such commitments, even though they may call for significant sacrifices and compromises. Failure to do so will lead to a sense of isolation. Generativity versus stagnation, middle age. Generativity is primarily the concern of establishing and guiding the next generation. Erickson's use of the term generativity is purposefully broad. It refers, of course, to having children and raising them. In addition, it refers to the productive and creative efforts in which adults take part. In other words, teaching, that have a positive effect on younger generations. Those unable or unwilling to establish and guide the next generation become victims of stagnation and self-absorption. Integrity versus despair, old age. Integrity is the acceptance of one's one and only life cycle as something that had to be, and that, by necessity, permitted of no substitutions. Despair expresses the feeling that the time is now too short, for the attempt to start another life and to try out alternative roads to integrity. Of Erickson's 8 stages, the 2 you should pay particular attention to are industry versus inferiority and identity versus role confusion, because they are the primary psychosocial issues that students must resolve during their elementary, middle school, and high school years. If you are committed to helping students learn as much as possible, you need to have a basic understanding of these two stages so that your lesson plans and instructional approaches help students achieve a strong sense of industry and identity. The next two sections briefly describe the major factors that contribute to students' sense of industry and their grasp of who they are and what they might become. Helping students develop a sense of industry. Between kindergarten and 6th grade, most children are eager to demonstrate that they can learn new skills and successfully accomplish assigned tasks. One factor that has long been known to have a detrimental effect on one's sense of industry is competition for a limited number of rewards. If you have ever taken a class where the teacher graded exams or projects on a curve, you are familiar with the most common form that such competition takes in schools. What the teacher does is compare each student's score with the score of every other student in that class. The few students who achieve the highest scores receive the top grade, regardless of the actual level of their scores. Then a predetermined number of B's, C's, D's, and F's are awarded. Because the resulting distribution of grades looks something like the outline of a bell, it is often referred to as a bell-shaped curve, which explains the origin of the term grading on the curve. There are at least two reasons that this practice may damage a student's sense of industry. Grading on the curve limits the top rewards to a relatively small number of students, regardless of each student's actual level of performance. If the quality of instruction is good and students learn most of what has been assigned, the range of scores will be relatively small. Consider the impact to your sense of industry if you respond correctly to 85% of the questions on an exam, but earn only a grade of C. Private note, who would curve like that? Who? That's not the purpose of a curve. End of private note. The same problem exists when, for whatever reasons, all students perform poorly. How much pride can you have in a grade of A or B when you know it is based on a low success rate? The senior author of this book endured a college chemistry class in which the top grade on an exam went to a student who answered only 40% of the questions correctly. 48%. 2. Curve grading also guarantees that some students have to receive failing grades regardless of their actual level of performance. Students who are forced into this unhealthy type of competition, there are acceptable forms of competition, oh thank you, may describe a sense of inadequacy and inferiority that will hamper them for the rest of their school career. The solution to this problem is to base grades on realistic and attainable standards that are worked out ahead of time and communicated to the students. In Chapter 14 on assessment, we describe how to do this. Also in Chapter 13, we describe several instructional approaches that will likely have a beneficial impact on students' sense of industry because they all promote learning and a sense of accomplishment. In general, they establish a classroom atmosphere in which students feel accepted for who they are and understand that the teacher is as interested in their success as they are. These goals are accomplished by providing clear expectations as to what students should be able to do after a unit of instruction, designing lessons that are logical and meaningful, and using methods that support effective learning processes. Pause and reflect. Suppose you were an elementary school teacher. What kinds of things would you do to help your students attain a sense of industry rather than inferiority? How would you help them feel more capable and productive? What would you avoid doing? Take a stand, promote industry, stamp out inferiority. For some educators, parents, and educational policymakers, an important purpose of education is to sort children into ability categories by forcing them to compete for a limited number of top grades. We strongly oppose such an approach and urge you to do the same because it promotes a sense of inferiority in most students by interfering with the development of such important characteristics as self-efficacy, self-worth, self-regulated learning skills, and intrinsic motivation. The evidence in support of this stand can be found in most of the subsequent chapters in this book. Instead, emphasize to students and others that a more relevant and useful goal is to help all students develop the attitudes, values, and cognitive skills that lead to high levels of meaningful learning. Do you agree that grading on a curve can promote a sense of inferiority for those who do not earn the top grades? No, I do not agree with that at all. Helping students formulate an identity. The most complex of Erikson's stages is identity versus role confusion. He wrote more extensively about this stage than any other. Because this stage is often misunderstood, let's use Erikson's own words to describe the concept of identity. An optimal sense of identity is experienced merely as a sense of psychosocial well-being. Its most obvious concomitants are a feeling of being at home in one's body, a sense of knowing where one is going, and an inner assuredness of anticipated recognition from those who count. As you may know from your own experience or the experience of others, the process of identity formation is not always smooth, and it does not always follow the same path. But by being aware of the problems and uncertainties that adolescents may experience as they try to develop a sense of who they are, you can help them positively resolve this major developmental milestone. American high schools are often criticized for not helping adolescents resolve identity problems. Do you agree? Why? How could school improve? Taking a psychosocial moratorium. One aspect of identity formation that often causes difficulty for adolescents is defining the kind of work they want to do. In other words, choosing a career. For individuals who are unprepared to make a career choice, Erikson suggested the possibility of a psychosocial moratorium. This is a period marked by a delay of commitment. Such a postponement occurred in Erikson's own life. After leaving high school, he spent several years wandering around Europe without making any firm decision about the sort of job he would seek. Under ideal circumstances, a psychosocial moratorium should be a period of adventure and exploration, having a positive, or at least neutral, impact on the individual and society. Adolescent identity statuses. Erikson's observations on identity formation have been usefully extended by James Marcia's notion of identity statuses. Identity statuses, of which there are 4, reflect the extent to which individuals have explored and committed themselves to a set of values on such critical issues as occupation, religion, sex role, and politics. Marcia developed this idea as a way to test scientifically the validity of Erikson's notions about identity. Marcia established the 4 identity statuses after he had conducted semi-structured interviews with a selected sample of male youths. The interviewees were asked their thoughts about a career, their personal value system, their sexual attitudes, and their religious beliefs. Marcia proposed that attainment of a mature identity depends on 2 variables, crisis and commitment. Crisis refers to times during adolescence when the individual seems to be actively involved in choosing among alternative occupations and beliefs. Commitment refers to the degree of personal investment the individual expresses in an occupation or belief.